Time before I go to the next topic, but I referenced something yesterday, civil rights and Democrats versus Republicans. A little bit more time before I go to the All right, sorry. Next topic. Maybe I should get started on that because I take things very slow and I like to have you marinate in things for a while. Um, Let me start with a brief word about what it's like being in California. There's a spirit over California that is oppressive and dark, and it's hard to describe. Besides that, I don't want to say that living here is pure darkness, but there's definitely a spirit over California that is just weird. It's just weird. There's certain things that just turn off that are normal in people. They just turn off for people in California. And from what I understand, it hasn't always been that way. And I don't think it has to be that way in the future. So please pray for California and help us fight back because we're doing the best we can here. And I do think that we can make a difference here. So, one of the things that we talk about with my students is Republicans versus Democrats on civil rights and the lack of ability to think clearly about this issue is, I wouldn't say it's depressing. It's just reality on on the campuses. The Republicans are given very little credit for what we've done in history. Um, there's always excuses from academia about why Democrats get a pass and Republicans don't. And there's a story going around out there that the Republicans switched sides with the Democrats on civil rights. And people will drop words like the Southern strategy and stuff like that. And if you don't know what that means, we'll poke into that. We need to poke into that. Um, when I broach this topic, and it's one of my favorite topics because I love talking about the Second Amendment, and that's right in line with all the civil rights stuff. When I broach this topic, I bring it back to what America is, because it's really two different versions of what America is and what America should be. And I think that America is a civil rights movement. So that's the first point I would make is America properly understood is the civil rights movement. So when people say the civil rights movement, they sometimes mean the 60s, 50s and 60s and uh, uh that's very truncated. So I don't talk that way. I mean, sometimes I'll do to just kind of get along and, get through the conversation, but I don't teach that way. So I start by saying that America is the civil rights movement. And I don't mean that we're the only one, but read the Declaration of Independence. I mean, read the whole thing. There's the famous lines in there from the second paragraph. I once had a professor of my own do an entire 3 hour lecture on the Declaration of Independence. I did not think it was possible to do that. And I have it on recording, thank God. But I was just amazed that he was able to do that. And it was interesting the whole time. I'm not going to do that for you, but I might draw from that. Of course, I will. Declaration, and I think the Declaration is the proper black backdrop pardon me, for understanding the Constitution and a correct understanding of the Constitution. So if you take the Hillsdale courses and stuff like that, I think they pretty much have the same view as I do, and they have a lot of great stuff that you can take online for free. So I would take advantage of that if I were you. Um, but what to say about Democrats versus Republicans? There's a lot to say. When people see the founding fathers or they hear talks about the founding fathers on campus, that is poo-pooed quite a bit because of slavery, obviously. And the issue of slavery is necessary for understanding the beginning of the Republican Party. The Republican Party was born in opposition to that reality of slavery that we had at the very beginning. And the Republican Party was founded as, you might say, a continuation of the Declaration of Independence, the civil rights movement therein, to make America more consistent with its own principles. Now, when we won the Civil War, there's some issues that you maybe need to know about. One is called Reconstruction. As you know, Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by a Democrat, by an actor, by the way, Hollywood. Some things never change. And a Democrat took over for him, named Andrew Johnson. You have to know some of this basic history. Andrew Johnson served, and then Ulysses S. Grant was elected in his place. And Ulysses S. Grant, of course, was a Republican. I think you should really dip into that area, and I'll show you some of the books I've looked at, and any Civil War literature is good on this. I mean, start with whatever is interesting to you. Obviously, you're not going to have time to be an expert. I don't feel like I'm an expert, but I feel like I get sort of the big picture on this. And let me show you some books here. So here's The Edge of the Sword by Ted Tunnell. I recommend this. This is this guy was actually a Democrat. Give him props. He was originally a Democrat. I think he became a Republican later. He moved from Vermont to, after the Civil War, to Louisiana to help enforce the new laws that were protecting freed Black people. And this book is, if you read it with the right spirit, is pretty powerful stuff in terms of what he was dealing with, the violence, the resistance to the Republicans. And he was trying to enforce this to protect Black people, the kind of terrorism that was involved in trying to protect Black people. I've just thought of another book, and I'm not sure if I have it in here or if I have it in my other library. I have multiple libraries. Let me show you another book. The book I was just thinking about was on the Klan. I'm gonna have to find that book. Maybe that will be part two. But let me show you another book. Here's another book called Reconstruction: A Concise History. It's fairly thin and very, very much worth having. The battle after the Civil War and the story of, broadly speaking, how that went down. Um, I'm not going to paint a picture of Republicans always good guys, Democrats always bad guys, but in general, the Republicans I feel like were especially used by God to end slavery legally. And what happened was that the Civil War ended and it was very costly. And I think that the Republicans just gave up fighting. After a war, people want to go back to normal as much as possible. And the Democrats had a special, they're the same. When Trump got elected, man, I had so many thoughts about the Civil War. They were histrionic. They were beating their chest and rending their garments. Uh, they were blocking traffic. This was in Los Angeles. The people they're blocking to get to work are other Democrats, most likely. Same here after the Civil War. I mean, it was much worse, of course, because they became violent and they locked down the South for pretty much a century. Um, and there were initially pockets of resistance to the resistance by Republicans and some Democrats, but the resistance was too great. It was just too much there. And so there developed a status quo, which became life in the South for a long time. And then what people usually refer to as the rights movement was in the 50s when status quo, when there was a more visible
Sorry, I'm trying
out.
to get this lower part to stay on there. Um,
Um,
this is the editor speaking. Sorry about that. This was originally published March 5th, 2020 through Facebook Live, and I'm wanting this lower part to stay here.
Backlash,
Um,
for lack of a better word,
how did I do that last time?
to that state. No,
There we go.
the southern, more visible virtue as the civil rights became life in the South,
Okay.
and but
I'm just rewinding it a little bit.
the resistance was too great. It was just too much there, and Democrat they locked down the South for civilists. These I had so many thoughts about the Civil War. They were histrionic. They were beating their chest and rending their garments. Uh, they were blocking traffic. This was in Los Angeles. The people they're blocking to get to work are other Democrats, most likely. Same here after the Civil War. I mean, it was much worse, of course, because they became violent and they locked down the South for pretty much a century. Um, and there were initially pockets of resistance to the resistance by Republicans and some Democrats, but the resistance was too great. It was just too much there. And so there developed a status quo, which became life in the South for a long time. And then what people usually refer to as the civil rights movement was in the 50s when there was a more visible out uh, backlash, for lack of a better word, to that status quo. So Okay. Did the Republicans switch sides with the Democrats? No, no. The Southern strategy that people talk about, I'm giving you kind of a broad overview here. When people talk about Southern strategy, I say, do you know what the Southern strategy is or was? And if you look this up on Wikipedia or whatever, you're not going to get this answer because this is original thought from me. I mean, it's not like I'm the only one that's had these thoughts, but this is my digestion of this material over a long period of time. And I had to be really sure about this. If I'm going to walk on campuses in Los Angeles that are just dens of vipers from the Democratic Party, then I had to be sure about this for myself, right? So I had to know, is this really true? Whose side am I on? Am I on this guy's side? Am I really on this guy's side, or was there a switch in the parties at some point, and I'm really just kind of in la la land, fantasy land? And so the Southern strategy was originally the Civil War. That's just take it back, you know. The Southern strategy was when Sherman brought his troops through cutting through Georgia. That was the first Southern strategy. And you know what? It worked. Those slaves were free as much as you could in that context. It's not like the Republicans were all of a sudden monarchs, although they were accused of being monarchs. But, we're not a king. It's not a kingdom. That's not how we're set up. And so the first black politicians that served in the Senate, served in Congress, were Republicans. It worked. That Southern strategy worked. It was all very violent, and people get sick of that. And you can imagine why. So when people talk about the Southern strategy, though, they really mean something that happened in the 1900s, the mid 1900s, the mid to late 1900s. And so you might want to look into a guy named Barry Goldwater. And I had to dip into this myself. And I am not prepared to talk at length about Barry Goldwater because I was an idiot and I didn't put that book on my lap. And I'm looking for it. I'll find the other books and I'll show you what I'm talking about. There's a good book on Barry Goldwater I recommend. Barry Goldwater was the Republican nominee for the president in 1964. He he was in the Senate from Arizona. He opposed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. And so Democrats, so you see that was when they switched sides, LBJ, not all Democrats say this, but it's pretty common to hear this. LBJ supported the Civil Rights Act and it was passed in Congress, signed into law, and the Republican presidential candidate, Barry Goldwater, said he did not support that act. So you got to get really clear about what was in that act and why Barry Goldwater did not support it and who Barry Goldwater was. So let me just throw out a few tidbits here. Barry Goldwater was one of the first senators. Well, he was an early senator of Arizona. I'm not sure if he was one of the first ones. I'm not sure why if I'm thinking clearly about that. I'm forgetting when Arizona became a state. I guess he was maybe not the first one, but one of the first ones. But he was an early senator from Arizona, and he had been in politics before Arizona became a state, I think. Oh man, I'm getting in trouble here. I need to know my facts here. But in any case, he desegregated the Arizona National Guard. His chief of staff was a black woman. He had the last name Goldwater, which is not exactly a white wasp name, if you know names. And if you know anything about how the Klan feels about Jewish people, you might want to review this stuff. People, when they call Ben Shapiro a Nazi at CSU Los Angeles, you can tell how in touch they are with the actual, Klan and stuff like that in American history. They hated Catholics, they hated Jews, um, and they hated anybody that disagreed with them, by the way. You might want to point that out, including Protestants. A lot of white people were lynched in the 1800s. Over 1,000 were lynched. So I hope this is making some sense to you, but you want to look into Barry Goldwater because he opposed that law on principle. On constitutional grounds, he opposed that law, the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And in any case, that Civil Rights Act would not have become law if it wasn't for overwhelming Republican support in Congress. Far more Republicans supported it than Democrats did. In fact, I think 2/3 of the opposition to that law in Congress was from Democrats. A lot of people don't know that. So, I mean, yes, there was a Southern strategy for Republicans because the Democrats controlled the South and all those votes. Why would you not have a Southern strategy? We really should have a California strategy. I wish that the Republicans had a California strategy. Look at how many votes are controlled by California. And for the same reason. For the same reason. And I need to do a special video on just the Second Amendment and quote unquote civil rights because we're going to talk about how Black veterans coming home from war, trained in arms, fought the Klan, how the NRA supported that. We're going to talk about the meaning and intention behind the 14th Amendment, incorporating the Second Amendment against the states, and how Republicans versus Democrats line up on that issue. When people ask me, when people, a lot of people say, my students will say, sometimes colleagues will say, look at the Republic, look at the South, it's all Republican, they're all a bunch of racists. The Southern strategy worked. I'll say, well, there's a correlation, there's an inverse correlation between immoral, horrible violence against Blacks and Republican control of the South. I said there's an inverse correlation. In other words, the worst violence and violation of natural rights by citizens and by the government that stood by and let it happen in the South was when Democrats ruled the whole thing. To the extent that that monopoly was broken up is the same extent that Blacks were protected. So now you have a South where Black people can walk in, buy an AR-15 and a concealable handgun if they have the money for that. Walk out of the store the same day. Here in California, we have a 10-day waiting period to cool off, but they can walk out of the store the same day and be armed against horrible, horrible violence. There's the result of the Southern strategy for you. Black people with the right to defend themselves and a higher standard of living than ever before in history. Reference the State of the Union, lowest Black unemployment in history. And notice who's sitting down and who's not clapping for that. It's not Republicans. That's why I say there's a spirit of oppression oppressiveness in California because people just don't see. I don't know why this wouldn't occur to people already. I mean, it's so obvious. And I don't know why it doesn't occur to so many blacks. I have a feeling that there's just a lot of social pressure that is irrational. We're all subject to social pressure. Um, and that's really what's going on is there's a lot of slogans and people don't think critically and carefully about the slogans. Is there any questions you guys have? If you have any questions, throw them on. And if you have them later, I can try to respond to them later or in a future video. But I just want to get you started on this topic, Republicans versus Democrats on civil rights, so-called civil rights. We do need to talk about the 1964 Civil Rights Act at some point. The controversy with that act was specifically the restrictions it had for private business owners. That's where the controversy was. It wasn't necessarily so much what the government could do itself. It was regulating what private business owners could do. So like desegregating restaurants, hotels, stuff like that. That was where the controversy was. Can the government tell a private business owner that they must serve blah, blah, blah in such and such a way? And see, what you're doing is you're restricting the freedom of the private business owner, right? So Democrats love that. You know, that's why they supported the act. And they had a Southern strategy too. A lot of people don't realize. I mean, the finger pointing goes on, and you have a Southern strategy. You did too. You ran the place. I mean, geez, for God's sake. Uh, we're just trying to give you a little competition for God's sake. I mean, maybe you could use some if you went back and looked and see what life was like for people, for some people. Anyway, this is a long topic. I just wanted to get you started on it, and I hope you guys have a great day. Take care.
All right. So that was from March 5th, 2020, as you can see on the screen, Thursday at 12:32 p.m. The LJM Facebook page, the public page. This was just a week, 10 days before our church was shut down in California. So we went to church that Sunday, and then the following Sunday it was shut down. All right. So that's that.
Pretty much.
What do we got? We got the next one coming up. Oh, that has 962 views. Oh, why was the second one more viewed than the first one?
Good evening, Facebook.
Sorry. The next one is on March 6th, the very next day. I guess I was pretty busy back then.
California.
I guess I was pretty busy back then. All right, guys. We'll see you. We'll see you soon, okay? I'm going to stop my sharing here. Maybe say hi. See ya.